The evening air was cool and heavy with mist, wrapping around the quiet train station like a soft blanket. The place was nearly empty, just a few lights flickering above the benches and the faint sound of a train far in the distance. A young woman sat alone on the last bench, her shoulders slightly hunched, a worn-out backpack at her feet. Her clothes were simple, but her eyes told a story that her mouth refused to share. She looked tired, not just from travel, but from something deeper, the kind of tiredness that lives in the heart. Every few minutes she looked at the tracks, then checked the small paper ticket in her hand, as if hoping it would change. It didn't, of course, and she let out a soft sigh. The ticket wasn't really the problem. It was everything that had come before it, and everything waiting after it. She didn't even know where she truly wanted to go anymore. She just knew she couldn't go back. A few steps away, a man walked slowly along the platform, his jacket a little faded, his hands buried in his pockets. He wasn't there to travel, just to think. People in the small town called him the Warrior, a name that didn't quite fit anymore. He had once worn a uniform, but now he wore quietness, the kind of quiet that comes after years of noise. He noticed the young woman sitting alone, and something about her stillness pulled his attention. He stood at a distance for a while, watching as she rubbed her hands together for warmth. There was nothing dramatic about her, yet something felt off, like a page missing from a book. Finally, he took a few steps closer and spoke in a calm voice. "The next train's late. They said there's some fog ahead." She nodded, not looking up right away, then gave a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm used to waiting," she said. He nodded too, not pushing for more. He'd met people like her before, people who had the look of someone escaping something unseen. They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound being the distant hum of the rails. After a while he said softly, "It's getting colder. You might want a cup of tea from the stall over there." Her first instinct was to refuse, but there was something steady about his voice. Not pity, not curiosity, just kindness. Simple, unspoken kindness. So she picked up her bag and followed him toward the tea stall at the far end of the platform. The man ordered 2 cups, holding one out to her without asking anything personal. She accepted it carefully, warming her hands around the cup. "Thank you," she said quietly. He smiled slightly. "No need. Everyone needs a warm drink sometimes." For a moment, they just stood there, sipping the steaming tea and watching the fog roll in. Finally, she asked, "You come here often?" He chuckled softly. "Only when I can't sleep." She tilted her head, curious. "Can't sleep because of work?" "Because of memories," he replied, still smiling but with a faraway look. Something in that answer made her chest tighten. Maybe because she had the same problem. But she didn't say that out loud. When the announcement for the delayed train echoed across the platform, she looked down at her shoes. "I might not get on that train," she murmured. Almost to herself, he turned toward her. "You waiting for someone?" "No," she whispered, then hesitated. "I'm trying to disappear for a while." He didn't laugh or question her, just nodded slowly, as if that made perfect sense. After a pause, she added softly, "I'm not who you think." Her voice cracked slightly, a mix of shame and warning. The man didn't ask what she meant. He simply said, "That's all right. I'm not who I used to be either." The honesty in his tone surprised her. For the first time that night, she looked him straight in the eye, searching for something she couldn't name. He didn't look away, and for a moment, they were just 2 strangers connected by quiet understanding. The night train finally arrived, the sound of metal wheels echoing through the fog. But neither of them moved right away. She looked at the open doors, then at him, unsure. He noticed the fear behind her calm expression, and somehow, without saying it, he understood she didn't just need a ride, she needed safety. "Wherever you're going," he said gently. "Make sure it's somewhere peaceful." She nodded, gripping her bag, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. The train waited, but she didn't board. Something about that man's quiet strength told her she didn't have to run so fast anymore. And though she didn't know it yet, that moment at the lonely station would change both of their lives forever. The night air was cold, and the sound of the passing train faded into the distance. She sat quietly on the bench, her hands wrapped tightly around a paper cup that had long gone cold. The streetlights flickered, and her eyes followed the rhythm like it was the only thing keeping her steady. He watched her from a short distance, the man people in town called the Warrior, not because he looked dangerous, but because he carried himself like someone who had already fought every kind of battle, his steps were heavy but calm, and when he spoke, his voice was low and steady. "You waiting for someone?" he asked gently. She shook her head, avoiding his eyes. "No," she said softly. "Just passing through." He nodded once like he already expected that answer. He looked at the empty platform, the quiet road, and the girl who clearly had nowhere to go. He could see the fear in her shoulders, the kind that comes from more than just being alone at night. "There's a diner still open a few blocks down," he said. "You should eat something warm." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm fine," she murmured. He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Suit yourself," he said, and turned to leave. But something made her stop him, maybe the tiredness, maybe the way he spoke without judgment. "Wait," she said quietly, "is it safe there?" He turned back, a hint of understanding in his eyes. "Safe enough," he said. They walked together down the dim street, the sound of their footsteps echoing against the cold pavement. He didn't ask her name, and she didn't ask his. But there was something strange about how silence between them didn't feel awkward. At the diner, the warm light hit her face, and for a moment she almost smiled. The waitress greeted the man with a nod, like she knew him well. "Same coffee?" she asked. He nodded, then looked at the girl. "What do you want?" She hesitated before whispering, "Just tea, please." When the waitress left, she stared at the table, tracing small circles with her finger on the wooden surface. He studied her quietly. The way she kept glancing toward the door, the way her hands trembled every time the bell above it rang. "You're scared," he said softly. Not as a question, she looked up, startled. "No," she said quickly. I don't like being followed." He leaned back, taking a sip of his coffee. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said. "But it looks like you've been running a long time." Her throat tightened and she gave a small, nervous laugh. "You sound like you know what that feels like." He smiled without warmth. "I do," he said. The tea arrived, and for a while neither of them spoke. Outside, the rain began to fall, tapping softly on the glass. It was the kind of night where stories wanted to be told, even by people who had sworn never to tell them. Finally, she said it, almost in a whisper. "I'm not who you think." He didn't flinch, didn't even look surprised. He stirred his coffee slowly and replied, "That's fine." She frowned, unsure what he meant. "You don't even know me," she said. He met her eyes for the first time, his gaze calm but steady. "We all hide things," he said. "I'm not who people think I am either." For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. The tension in her chest eased just a little. There was something comforting about not being questioned, not being doubted. The waitress brought the bill, and before she could reach for anything, he had already placed some money on the table. "Come on," he said quietly. "It's late. I'll walk you somewhere safe." She hesitated again, torn between fear and the strange sense of trust she felt. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. He shrugged. "Because someone once did the same for me." As they stepped out into the rain, she pulled her jacket tighter. He offered her his coat, but she shook her head. They walked down the quiet road toward the edge of town, the sound of rain mixed with the hum of distant streetlights. After a few minutes, she spoke again, her voice barely above the rain. "You really shouldn't trust me." He gave a small smile. "I didn't say I did," he replied, "but I trust that you need help." Something in her heart shifted then, a small crack in the wall she'd built so carefully. She didn't know where this road would lead, or who exactly this man was, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel completely alone. When they reached the turn near the old gas station, he nodded toward a small path leading to a cabin barely visible through the trees. "You can stay there for the night," he said. "It's quiet, safe." She looked at him, unsure if she should believe him. But the rain had turned cold, and her legs were too tired to keep walking. "Just for one night," she said. He nodded. "One night's enough for now." As she stepped toward the cabin, she whispered to herself, "I'm not who you think." And somewhere behind her, he murmured softly, "Neither am I." The morning came slowly, with soft light slipping through the cracks in the wooden walls. The cabin smelled of smoke and old pine, quiet and still. She opened her eyes to the sound of birds somewhere outside. For a moment she didn't know where she was, and her heart jumped. Then she remembered the man, the cabin, the safety that still felt too strange to trust. She sat up, listening carefully. There were footsteps outside, steady, calm, and familiar. Not the kind that chased her, but the kind that simply existed. She looked around, noticing how neat everything was, the blanket folded on the chair, the boots by the door, everything in its place. This was a space made by someone who needed peace more than comfort. When she stepped outside, the cold air brushed her face. The world looked washed clean after a light rain. The ground was wet and the trees dripped quietly. He was standing near the fence fixing a loose post. His jacket hung open, and there was a calmness in the way he worked. "Morning," he said without looking up. She hesitated, then replied softly. "Morning. You sleep all right?" he asked, still focused on the post. "Yeah," she said, though it wasn't true. Sleep had come and gone in short, uneasy pieces. But she didn't want to sound weak, not after he'd already done so much. He nodded. "There's breakfast inside. You can eat before it gets cold." The smell of bread and tea filled the cabin. She sat at the small wooden table, her fingers wrapped around the warm cup. The sound of rain dripping outside mixed with the quiet crackle of the fire. It felt like a moment that didn't belong to fear or running. He came in after a while. Wiping his hands on a towel, he sat across from her, his movements simple and sure. For a while neither spoke, they didn't need to. She finally broke the silence. "You live here alone?" He nodded. "For a few years now, doesn't it get lonely?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Sometimes," he said, "but peace has its price, and I'm willing to pay it." She looked around again, at the books stacked in the corner, at the tools hanging neatly by the wall. "It's quiet here," she said. "That's the point," he replied. After breakfast, she walked down to the river. The water was clear and slow, reflecting the gray sky. She sat on a rock and watched it move, wondering if she'd ever feel as calm as that water. The air was cool, and the sound of the stream felt almost like a song. When she turned, she saw him standing a little distance away, holding a bucket. "You don't have to help with anything," he said. "You can rest," she shook her head. "I want to." He watched her for a moment, then nodded. "All right." They spent the next hour working in silence, collecting water, gathering dry wood, fixing the door hinge that had come loose. It wasn't much, but it made her feel useful again. It had been a long time since she'd done something without fear behind it. Later that day, he found her sitting by the window, staring at the small photo frame on the shelf. It showed a group of people in uniforms, smiling, young and tired. "You were in the army?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Once." She tilted her head. "Do you miss it?" He paused for a while before answering. "Sometimes I miss the people, not the fight." There was something in his voice that felt familiar, loss that had turned into silence. She didn't ask more. She knew what it meant to lose something and not talk about it. As the sun began to set, the cabin filled with golden light. She helped prepare dinner, soup and bread again, simple but warm. They ate quietly, listening to the wind outside. The world beyond those walls didn't matter for now. When she finished eating, she looked up and said softly, "Thank you." He met her eyes. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "I know," she replied. "But I still want to say it." He gave a small smile. "You're safe here," he said, "for as long as you need to be." Her throat tightened at his words. Safety was something she hadn't believed in for a long time. That night she lay awake again, but this time her thoughts were different. She listened to the sound of the rain, the quiet creaks of the cabin, the slow rhythm of a life that didn't ask anything of her. For the first time she felt like she belonged somewhere, not because she deserved it, but because someone saw her without judgment. Before closing her eyes, she whispered softly, "Maybe peace isn't about forgetting. Maybe it's about finding a place where the noise finally stops." Outside, the rain kept falling gently. The forest breathed quietly around the cabin, and for that night, she didn't run in her dreams, she simply rested, as if the world had finally stopped chasing her. Morning light crept through the thin curtains, touching the edge of the small wooden table where 2 cups of untouched tea had gone cold. The sound of birds mixed with the distant flow of the river, bringing a kind of peace that didn't quite belong to either of them. She stood outside, barefoot on the grass, holding a letter in her trembling hands. The paper was wrinkled and wet in some corners, maybe from tears, maybe from the river mist. Her eyes kept moving over the same words again and again, as if reading them would somehow make them disappear. He watched her quietly from the porch, his old jacket hanging loose over his shoulders. He didn't speak, didn't ask, didn't interrupt the kind of silence that carried too much truth inside it. He knew that look. The one that said someone had reached the point where running didn't help anymore. After a while, she sat down by the water. Her knees pulled close and said softly, "You don't have to keep pretending you don't see it." He walked over slowly, sitting a few feet away. "See what?" He asked gently. "The fear," she whispered. "The part I try to hide." She looked at him then, her eyes red but steady. "I've been living under someone's control for years, not because I wanted to, but because I owed him more than I could ever repay." The words came out slow, heavy, each one carrying a piece of the life she had tried so hard to bury. She talked about promises she didn't make but had to keep, about days that felt like cages, and nights when she dreamed of freedom but woke up more afraid than before. When she paused, her voice broke into a whisper. "He owned everything, even my name." The man beside her stayed quiet, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he knew words weren't what she needed right now. Sometimes silence had more power than comfort. "I thought if I ran far enough he'd stop looking," she said, her fingers clutching the letter tighter. "But this came yesterday. It means he knows where I am." She handed him the letter, her hand shaking slightly. He unfolded it and read the short, sharp sentences, the kind written by someone who used power like a weapon. The words weren't loud, but they carried a threat. He folded the letter again and placed it gently beside her. "You shouldn't have to keep living like this," he said softly. "I can't keep anyone close," she replied, her voice filled with guilt. "I shouldn't have come here." "You shouldn't have helped me. I'm trouble." He took a slow breath, his eyes fixed on the river ahead. "You think you're trouble," he said, "but I see someone trying to start over." Her lip trembled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she whispered, "Why are you being so kind to me?" He thought for a moment, then said, "Because someone once showed me kindness when I didn't deserve it either." The wind picked up, carrying leaves across the water for the first time. She smiled, just a little, a small crack in the armor she had worn too long. He stood up, brushing off his hands. "Come on," he said quietly. "There's work to do," she frowned. "Work?" He nodded toward the cabin. "If you stay here, you help." Simple rule. The next hours passed quietly. She washed the dishes, swept the floor, tried to keep herself busy. Every small task felt strange, peaceful, ordinary, almost healing for someone who had lived in fear. Even doing nothing wrong felt new. He worked outside fixing an old fence, occasionally glancing toward the cabin. He didn't ask about her past anymore, and she didn't talk about it. They simply shared the silence, both understanding that healing didn't need questions. That night, as the fire crackled in the small fireplace, she sat near the window staring at the letter once more. She could have burned it, but something stopped her. Maybe it was a reminder that her old life still existed somewhere out there, a life she wasn't ready to face. He sat across from her, sipping his tea. "You know," he said, "it's not weakness to be scared." She looked up, surprised. "Then what is it?" "It's proof you're still trying," he said. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a victim, not as a runaway, but as a person still learning to breathe again. Outside, the moonlight touched the water, the same river that carried away her fear a few hours ago, and even though danger might still be somewhere on the road behind them, for this one night there was peace. She whispered quietly, almost to herself, "Maybe I can stop running." He looked at her and nodded. "Maybe," he said, "but if you do run again, make sure it's towards something, not away from it." She smiled faintly, holding on to that thought like a promise. The letter lay forgotten on the table, but inside her heart, something new had started. A sense that maybe the story wasn't about hiding anymore, but about finding herself again. The sky was soft and gray that evening. The air carried the smell of rain, and the wind whispered through the trees near the cabin. It had been quiet for days, the kind of peaceful silence that starts to feel normal. Almost safe, she was beginning to believe maybe, just maybe, her past had stopped chasing her. She had started helping more around the place, washing clothes, cleaning the porch, and even cooking simple meals. The man didn't talk much, but his quiet presence gave her a sense of safety she hadn't felt in a long time. They didn't need to speak to understand each other. Sometimes they would just sit outside, watching the sunset fade behind the trees, letting the world move slowly for once that night. She laughed for the first time in weeks. It was small, almost shy, but real. He looked up from the chair and smiled a little. It was strange how two broken people could share silence and still feel seen. For a while, the world felt calm, like all the storms had passed. But peace never stays long when someone is still looking for you. It started with a sound, faint, distant, but sharp enough to make her heart skip. The low rumble of an engine far down the road. She froze, her hand still holding the cup of tea. The man noticed immediately. His eyes moved toward the window, his face turning serious. She whispered, "Do you hear that?" He nodded slowly. "Stay here," he said softly. Standing up, the sound grew louder, the tires crunching against the gravel path. She could see headlights through the trees, glowing like two watchful eyes moving closer. Her throat went dry. It wasn't a stranger passing by, when she knew that sound too well. She had heard it too many times before. Her voice shook. "He found me." He didn't ask who. He didn't need to. He simply stepped closer to the window, watching the car stop at the edge of the driveway. The rain had started to fall again, soft at first, then heavier. For a moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the rain hitting the roof. She stood up slowly, her hands trembling. "I should go," she whispered. "I can't drag you into this." He turned to her, calm but firm. "You're not running again," he said. Tears filled her eyes. "You don't understand if I stay. He interrupted softly. "He won't." Not tonight. There was no anger in his tone, only certainty. The kind that comes from someone who had faced danger before and learned how to stay steady. He walked to the shelf and took out a flashlight. Not for fighting, just for light. The way he moved told her he wasn't afraid. But careful, the car engine stopped. The headlights stayed on, shining through the thin curtains. Her heart pounded in her chest. The door creaked slightly as the wind pushed against it. Minutes felt like hours. The man stood near the window, eyes steady, waiting. Then the headlights turned off and the night fell silent again. She held her breath, whispering, "Maybe they left." He shook his head. "People like that don't drive all the way out here just to leave." She sat down slowly. Her hands pressed together, her mind filled with memories she wanted to forget. Voices. Control, fear, promises she never wanted to make again. After what felt like forever, she heard footsteps outside, slow, heavy, moving closer to the porch. Her eyes widened and she looked at him. He nodded, motioning her to stay back. The door never opened, no voice called out. Only the sound of boots on the wet ground and then silence again. The rain softened, the crickets returned, and for a moment it was as if the world was holding its breath. He opened the door slightly and looked out. There was no one there. Only tire marks on the road and footprints near the steps. He closed it again gently, locking it this time, she whispered. "He was here, wasn't he?" He nodded. Someone was. Her shoulders shook as she sat back down. She felt like the safety she had built piece by piece was falling apart again. He sat across from her, the same calm look on his face. "Listen," he said quietly. "You're not alone this time." She looked up, her eyes filled with fear and doubt. "You don't even know who I really am." He leaned forward slightly. "I don't need to know. I can see what kind of person you are now." His words didn't erase her fear, but they gave her something else, strength. The kind she hadn't felt in a long time. They stayed awake for most of the night. The rain finally stopped, but neither of them slept. Every sound outside made her heart race. Every whisper of wind reminded her that the past wasn't done yet. When dawn came, the sky was pale and quiet again. He stepped outside, walking around the cabin. Checking the tracks, she watched him from the doorway, her hands gripping the edge. The tire marks led away from the house. Disappearing into the forest road, whoever came was gone, at least for now. He looked back at her and said softly, "You're safe for the moment, but we have to be careful." She nodded slowly. Taking a deep breath, the fear was still there. But so was something new, trust inside the cabin. The cold tea still sat on the table, untouched, and through the window. The first light of morning touched the world again. For now they were still standing, and that was enough. The morning light broke through the clouds. Soft and golden, the cabin looked peaceful from the outside. But inside, the air felt heavy. She hadn't slept, not even for a few minutes. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those headlights again. The sound of the car on the gravel still echoed in her ears. He was already awake, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee. His calmness never changed, no matter how uncertain things became. She wondered if he ever got scared, or if he had simply learned to live with fear. She walked over quietly, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Did you find anything else outside?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "Just footprints," he said. "Someone came close, then left before sunrise." Her heart sank. "Then he's still watching," she whispered. He didn't answer right away, he just stared out the window, the light catching the lines of his tired face. Finally he said, "If he's still out there, he'll show himself again, and when he does, we'll be ready." The word "we" comforted her more than she wanted to admit. For so long she had handled everything alone, but now someone was standing beside her, not to save her but to make her feel less invisible. The hours passed quietly. She tried to distract herself by sweeping the floor, preparing breakfast and pretending everything was normal, but deep down she knew something was coming. She could feel it like a storm waiting just beyond the trees. In the afternoon the silence broke. A car engine roared in the distance. Closer this time, stronger. She froze, her hands gripping the edge of the table. He looked at her once, then stood up and walked toward the door. "Stay inside," he said calmly. "No matter what happens," her voice shook. "Please, don't go out there." He gave a small smile. "I've dealt with worse," he said. "Trust me," she didn't want to, but she nodded. Watching him step outside into the sunlight, the air felt thick with tension. She moved to the window, her heart racing. A black car stopped on the dirt road, dust swirling around it. The door opened slowly, and a man stepped out. He was dressed neatly, but there was something cold about the way he moved, like everything around him was beneath him. She pressed her hand against the glass, whispering, "No, no, no." He stood tall and still near the fence, his voice calm but firm. "What are you looking for?" he asked. The man smirked. "I'm looking for someone who doesn't belong here." Their eyes met, both of them unshaken. "There's no one here who belongs to you," he said, his tone quiet but sharp. The man's smile faded. He took a few steps forward, his shoes crunching on the gravel. "You think you can hide her from me?" he said. "She's mine, she knows that, inside." She covered her mouth, her body trembling. Every word felt like a shadow reaching through the walls. He didn't move, didn't raise his voice. "You should leave," he said. "There's nothing for you here." The man laughed softly. "You don't understand what you're getting into." "I understand enough," he replied. The tension hung between them like a wire pulled tight. Neither moved, but the weight of everything unsaid filled the space. After a few moments, the man turned his head toward the cabin. His eyes found her through the window. She gasped and stepped back quickly. He smirked. "You can't hide forever," he said. She felt her heart pounding. Her knees almost gave out. The man by the fence didn't look away. "She doesn't need to hide anymore," he said, his voice steady. The man scoffed. "You think you can protect her?" He took a slow breath. "No," he said softly, "but I can stand between her and the person who hurt her." There was a long silence. The air was thick with rain and unspoken history. The man in the black car finally gave a dry smile. "You'll regret this," he said, before turning back toward his car. She watched as the car reversed down the road, the sound fading into the trees. The man walked back toward the cabin, his steps heavy but calm. When he stepped inside, she ran to him, her eyes wide with panic. "He saw me, he knows I'm here," she said. Her voice shaking, he nodded slowly, setting his cup on the table. "I know," he said. "But now he also knows you're not alone." Tears filled her eyes. "He'll come back," she whispered. "Maybe," he said. "But next time, he won't find the same person he left behind." She looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He smiled faintly. "You're stronger than you think." She sat down, her hands covering her face. The tears came. But this time they weren't just from fear. They were from exhaustion, relief, and something else. Hope. The rest of the evening passed quietly. The rain began to fall again, tapping softly against the windows. She sat near the fire, staring into the flames, replaying the moment when he stood outside without fear. In her heart, she knew this wasn't over, but something inside her had shifted for the first time. She felt like maybe she didn't have to run anymore, she whispered softly. "I'm tired of being afraid." He looked up from the window and said, "Then stop being afraid of who you are." She smiled faintly, the firelight reflecting in her eyes, and for the first time she believed she could. The sun had barely risen when she opened her eyes. The faint glow through the window made the cabin look calm again, but her heart still carried the storm from the night before. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands, wondering how much longer she could live like this, running from something that never stopped following her. He was outside chopping wood, the steady rhythm of the axe hitting the log echoing through the trees. It was a sound that felt safe to her now, Strong, grounded, she stepped out quietly, the morning air cool against her skin. He looked up and gave a small nod, the kind that said good morning without needing words. "You didn't sleep," he said. She shook her head. "Couldn't," she replied softly. "Every time I closed my eyes." I kept hearing his voice. He leaned on the handle of the axe, watching her for a moment. "The mind keeps replaying what it fears," he said, "but it doesn't have to control you." His words stayed in her mind long after he walked back to the cabin. She thought about fear, about how it had shaped every decision she ever made. It was strange how something invisible could hold so much power. As the day passed, she tried to stay busy, sweeping the porch, washing clothes, helping with whatever she could, but inside, she was still fighting something. The fear was no longer just about the man who had come for her. It was about herself, about the version of her that believed she would never be free. When the evening came, the air turned cold again. They sat by the fire, the soft crackling filling the silence between them. She stared into the flames for a long time before finally speaking. "I've been lying to myself," she said quietly. "I thought leaving that place would fix everything, but I'm still trapped not by him but by my own fear." He didn't interrupt. He just listened, his eyes calm and kind. She took a deep breath. "You know, I spent years believing I deserved the way he treated me, that I owed him something, even my silence." Her voice trembled. "But now I don't even know who I am without that fear." He placed his cup on the table. "You're someone who survived," he said simply. "That's not weakness, that's strength." She looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Then why do I still feel so small?" "Because you're still standing in the shadow of something that's already gone," he said. "You just haven't realized the light's been there all along." His words hit deep. She didn't know how to respond. Instead, she turned toward the window, watching the trees sway gently in the night breeze. After a long silence, she whispered, "I don't know how to stop being afraid." He smiled faintly. "You don't stop fear," he said. "You walk with it, and every step you take, it grows smaller." That night she sat awake long after he went to sleep. The moonlight touched the floor, and the world outside seemed still. She took out the old letter again, the one filled with threats, with reminders of the life she had escaped. This time she didn't cry. She read it slowly, carefully, then tore it into pieces, letting them fall into the fire. The flames caught the edges, turning the paper into soft orange curls before it vanished into ash. She watched until the last piece was gone. For the first time, she felt something shift inside her, a quiet relief, a lightness she hadn't known in years. It wasn't complete freedom yet, but it was a start when morning came. The air smelled fresh. She stepped outside barefoot, feeling the wet grass under her feet. It was strange how something so simple could make her feel alive again. He came out soon after, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You're up early," he said, handing her one. She smiled slightly. "Couldn't sleep," she said, "but it feels different this time." He nodded. "That's what happens when you stop running from yourself." She looked out toward the river, the sunlight dancing on the water. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked. He took a slow sip. "No," he said honestly. "But you're not the same person who ran away, and that means it can't break you the same way again." She stood there for a moment, breathing deeply, letting the air fill her lungs. It felt like breathing for the first time, not out of panic but out of choice inside. The fire had gone out and the cabin was quiet, but her heart finally wasn't. Later that evening, she found an old notebook on the shelf and began to write, not about what had happened, but about what she wanted next. She didn't know where she was heading yet, but she knew one thing: she wouldn't be defined by fear anymore. He watched her from across the room, the faintest smile touching his lips. He didn't say anything because he didn't need to. She was finally finding her own voice, and though the past still lingered in the corners of her mind, it no longer had power over her. She was learning that escape wasn't always about leaving a place. Sometimes, it was about walking out of your own darkness, step by step. The night settled around the cabin, soft and peaceful. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about running. She was thinking about living, about building, about believing, and deep down she knew the real escape had finally begun. The sun rose softly over the hills, painting the sky with shades of gold and pink. The air was cool, carrying the smell of wet earth and pine. It was the kind of morning that made the world feel new again. She stood at the doorway of the cabin, her small bag packed, her heart steady for the first time in a long while. The man stepped outside quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one without saying much. They stood side by side, watching the light grow stronger for days. They had talked about what came next. And now the moment had finally arrived. She took a slow sip, the warmth of the drink grounding her. "It feels strange," she said softly. "I've wanted to leave for so long, but now that I can, it almost feels hard." He smiled gently. "That's what happens when you find peace. It makes you want to stay." She looked around. The small garden she had helped plant, the chair by the porch, the sound of the river nearby. Every corner of the place held memories of silence, healing and quiet strength. For the first time, she wasn't leaving out of fear. She was leaving to begin something new. He placed her small bag in the back of the truck. "You sure you're ready?" he asked. She nodded. "I don't know where I'm going, but I know I can't stay in the past anymore." They drove through the forest road in silence, the sound of gravel under the tires mixing with the morning birds. The trees parted slowly, revealing the open road ahead. It stretched far and wide, like a promise waiting to be kept after a while. She looked out of the window, her eyes calm. "Do you ever think about starting over?" she asked. He chuckled softly. "Every day," he said. "But starting over doesn't always mean leaving. Sometimes it just means choosing to live differently." She thought about that for a while, letting the words settle in her heart. "I think that's what I'm doing," she said quietly. "Learning to live differently." They reached the small town where she had first arrived weeks ago. It felt completely different now, not because it had changed, but because she had. The train station stood just as she remembered. Quiet waiting. He stopped the truck near the platform. She stepped out, the soft wind touching her face. She could still remember the night she had met him here. Scared, tired, and unsure if she would make it through another day. Now, as she stood in the same place, she felt like a completely different person. The world hadn't become easier, but her heart had grown stronger. He carried her bag to the bench. "You'll be fine," he said quietly. She looked at him, a faint smile on her lips. "You really believe that?" He nodded. "I wouldn't say it if I didn't." The train whistle echoed in the distance, soft and low. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For not asking too many questions, for letting me breathe." He smiled. "Sometimes people don't need answers, they just need a place to rest." She took a step closer, her voice gentle. "You know, when I first came here, I told you I wasn't who you thought I was." He nodded. Remembering that first whisper on the platform, she continued, "I think now, I'm finally becoming who I'm supposed to be." He looked at her for a moment, then said, "That's all that ever matters." The train arrived with a slow hum, the doors sliding open with a hiss of air. She turned to him one last time, her eyes full of quiet gratitude. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too," he replied, "and remember, no one owns your story anymore." She smiled through the small ache in her chest and stepped onto the train, finding a seat by the window. As the train began to move, she looked out, watching him grow smaller in the distance, standing by the road, steady as ever. The forest gave way to open fields, and the world seemed endless. She watched the sunlight stretch across the land, and for the first time she didn't feel lost, she felt free. She opened her small notebook and wrote a few words. "The past is behind me, the road is mine." Then she smiled and closed it, letting the paper rest on her lap. Outside, the wind carried the scent of freedom, the promise of new beginnings. She didn't know what waited ahead, but that didn't matter anymore. She wasn't running now, she was moving forward. The man stood by the empty platform long after the train disappeared. The morning light touched his face as he whispered softly to the air. She made it. The world around him felt lighter somehow, like her courage had left a trace behind. He turned and walked back toward the forest. The same calm stride, the same quiet heart, and somewhere far down the tracks she leaned against the window, eyes closed, a small smile on her face. She wasn't who anyone thought she was. She was someone stronger, braver, and free. Her story had just begun, and this time it was truly hers.